As we get set for another season of college football, we can't help but think about what's next for the sport in the future. The college athletics landscape is certainly changing, and football is right there at the forefront of it all. From players' rights to the makeup of conferences, we have a whole lot to get to and a whole lot to talk about. And for that, we bring in basically the only expert that we have that is the perfect person for this, Brandon Marcello. And Brandon, let's get right into this, because we've seen attempts in the past of college athletes trying to unionize, and that has failed. But as we sit here in the year 2025, at the season about to start, where do we stand now with the future of players and being able to form unions?
Well, we're in a position now where I think athletic directors and some commissioners are more willing to listen to the possibility of collective bargaining and getting players together to have a players association. But as a lot of folks have told me, you've never see a union formed by the employer saying, hey, you guys need to form a union. It's going to be up to the players themselves. There's a lot of player advocates out there that have created their own organizations, like Athletes Organization by Jim Cavell or the National College Players Association. But there are members of that. There are players with that. But we haven't quite seen a group of players really galvanize support and say, hey, we want to collectively bargain. We want to be at the table negotiating what our contracts look like, what revenue sharing should look like, and even potentially what the transfer portal should look like, and other rules-making policies out there. That hasn't quite happened yet. But now that revenue sharing is now a reality, back starting on July 1, you're going to see some of this more come to the forefront. The question is are you going to have commissioners out there that are more willing to listen to it? My answer is yes. It's been a slow process, but they're more willing to listen now. But also, that's all contingent on what Congress is going to do potentially as early as this fall when they look at this new legislation called the SCORE Act, because that could potentially roll back some things and give more power to the NCAA and to the conferences, and potentially end the entire discussion of these players potentially being recognized as employees, whether it's with their schools or maybe some type of national organization that can bargain with these conferences. So again, a lot up in the air, and a lot of it's going to be contingent on what happens in Washington, D.C.
So with the way that things are currently constructed with today's model, do you feel that it is necessary for players to be able to form unions, or is it just too hard to even answer that because we know things are likely going to change down the road?
I think there's an avenue for it, and there should be an avenue for it. I think that they need to be looking at all options. It's probably going to be very impossible for them to get all together and go, hey, we have one union for 5,000 football athletes and one union for this for men's basketball and women's basketball. You're probably going to have to break it up into tiers. Say you have a union for the SEC, you have a union for the Big Ten, et cetera, something along those lines to help with collective bargaining. But again, you need some organization there. You also have to consider that unlike professional sports, there's such a high turnover rate with so many players, thousands of players every year. They're only there on campus for 4 years, maybe 5 years at most. And so when you look at leadership, players who are going to represent you and speak for you, they're going to be there only a few years, and then it's on to the next. So it's very hard to kind of keep some consistency there. Also, let's face it, these players and athletes, they have a lot going on in their lives. They have football, basketball, whatever, but also schoolwork, other obligations with their NIL, and also they're just younger. Not a lot of them are teenagers are sitting there going, well, I need to have this meeting to discuss these business practices and figure out what we need to be doing with workload and revenue sharing. That's just a very hard thing to be asking of these teenagers, and it's something that is going to be very difficult, to be quite honest, to really get an organic galvanization here of these players to represent themselves and say, we want to be at the table negotiating.
Yeah, when you break it down like that and think about, hey, these are teens who are trying to just navigate their way through life, it makes it so much more interesting that we are in this position that we are in right now. TV, of course, rules a whole lot because the TV rights deals is where a lot of that big money comes in for these conferences and how everyone makes their heyday and their paydays. How and when do you think TV will shape the future of what things look like ahead?
You know, that's really the big part of all of this when we look at the future of college athletics, because we've seen over the last 20 years that any conference realignment and big shakeups are always usually tied to the expiration of media rights deals. It's why the Pac-12 pretty much died, then came back to life. It's why the Big Ten got bigger. It's why the SEC got bigger. That's why the Power Five went down to 4, and maybe it'll be even less in the future. And then when you look at the early 2030s, we're introducing the most consequential time we have seen yet with conferences and media rights. Within a 5-year period starting in 2030, you're going to see 5 major media deals expire, 3 with major conferences, but also the biggest contracts in the postseason, the NCAA men's basketball tournament, and also the college football playoff. So when you put that all on your plate and consider it's not just one conference or one deal that could shake things up, it's a lot more than that, and several conferences are involved. Everybody's kind of scrambling and put themselves in the best position. From the school perspective, schools are trying to put themselves in the best perspective to be in the conversation down the road. So if you're a lower tier like ACC team, you're trying to improve your stock in the ACC so you can be part of whatever the new ACC looks like. If you're one of the higher teams in the ACC, say like a Florida State or Clemson, you can understand why over the last few years they've been looking at potentially leaving the ACC to try and get into the SEC or elsewhere to be part of a bigger conference and to get a bigger piece of the pie, both competitively and also with the payday. And the big question is, how is this all going to work out? No one knows, but everybody's fighting for themselves right now, whether it's among the conferences or even just with the schools going out on their own in themselves. But there's a lot of money at stake and a lot of ideas out there, whether it be super leagues, shrinking things down to maybe what we see with the Big Ten and SEC joining forces, or maybe joining a whole new league that's outside the FBS structure and NCAA structure, that's a 70-team field. We've seen that being pitched by private equity firms, at least 2 major situations there, but only one of them have survived so far, and they're still pitching their ideas to a lot of ACC and Big 12 schools, in addition to the SEC and Big 10. So what you have here are a lot of outsiders, but also people within these conference structures thinking about maybe we should be creating something new, doing something different that, 1, could differentiate ourselves, but 2, get us more money when it comes to this media rights deals, because there's an opportunity here, not necessarily a commitment, but an opportunity here for these conferences to say, why do we have to run things the way we always have? Maybe we should create a whole new structure, a whole new way of what college football looks like, and go pitch that to these media networks, and then figure out men's basketball, women's basketball, and Olympic sports from there. A lot on the table, and by the way, they've got about 5 years to figure this all out before this next domino falls starting in 2030.
Yeah, that'll be here before we know it. Have to figure it out pretty soon. And you went down this avenue. I want to open up that door even more, continue down that path. Talking about conferences, when you mentioned the Power Four, maybe that becoming even less. You look at the Big Ten and the SEC and maybe a super conference being formed. In general, when we talk a super conference or we talk about a pro model, does it seem that one of those is going to be inevitable, and that's the way we're going to be going down?
There's been a lot more pushback on the super conference idea than what I've expected in doing my reporting over the last 6 months on all of this. But you still have a lot of, I guess, interested and open ears willing to listen among athletic directors, more so than commissioners. The commissioners want to keep their jobs, right? They want to keep their conferences together, and by doing so, they get to keep their jobs. But you have a lot of individual schools going, you know what? Super conferences actually sound quite intriguing because, 1, it's a new opportunity. 2, it's more money. 3, we could be in a much more competitive space and be in the postseason maybe more often with a Super League format where there's a little bit more of an ease of access into a postseason format or playoff. But the commissioners mostly have been against it. But again, the commissioners answer to the athletic directors and the school presidents. So the big question here is to do the groundwork, go into the trenches and see what these athletic directors and these presidents think. And that's why you've seen some private equity firms developing Super League ideas and going to the athletic directors and presidents themselves and pitching it to them, more so than going to the conference commissioners and pitching it. And so there's a lot of a groundswell there, so to speak, of these pitches. The question is they're going to be getting enough of these ADs and presidents on board. Again, they've got time, but not much time. They got about 5 years to maybe figure this out, and it's the early goings yet. There's been 2 major pitches from 2 different private equity firms, wherever you want to call it. One of them, college student football league, that has fallen by the wayside. They stopped giving up work on that back in December, but there is one more still around. They call it Project Rudy, which is one that promises an influx of cash, a $9 billion investment to help start up the league with a bigger return on investment on the backside for these schools. And that obviously has perked up the ears of the individual schools and these athletic directors.
Yeah, money, of course, makes everyone happy out there. And you talk about more money going to the big guys. What does that mean for the future of the mid-majors if all these things keep trending the way that they're trending?
It's very shaky ground. I mean, it's shaky ground right now just when they're dealing with revenue sharing because, as we know, the Group of Five conferences, for the most part, other than the American, have not opted into revenue sharing. But I think people forget that they are still on the hook for the back payments in this House settlement dating back 10 years, and they'll be paying that over the next 10 years. So what you've seen already, revenue sharing just started a month ago, but you've already seen 37 Division I programs be cut across Division I, and there are going to be more. And by the way, the FBS conferences, the major conferences, have not been immune to this. We've seen Olympic programs cut at Washington State, NC State, and Virginia. And there probably will be more once the reality of the situation, this money that they're losing, becomes more at the forefront here. So there's going to be more cuts. And when you look at the Group of Five conferences, they're the ones that are probably going to have to make even more cuts than the others. So what does their future look like? What are their media rights deals look like? There's a lot of questions that they're dealing with. And again, it goes down to the individual schools. They're trying to better prepare themselves to be in a better position in the future. That's why here recently, within the last couple of weeks, you've seen the University of Memphis, an American conference school, offer the Big 12 $200 million in commercial sponsorships to accept them into their league. By the way, they wouldn't even get any media rights back from the Big 12. They're just saying, can we buy our way into the conference? And the way it's been described to me by a lot of experts in the industry is it's very similar to what we see in professional leagues with expansion fees, right? You've seen recently in NHL with the relocation of the Arizona team, a $1.2 billion expansion fee in some ways. And the way it was explained to me, Memphis can't even get into the Big 12 by offering $200 million. And so here in the future, if you're a Group of Five school trying to get into a power conference, even one of the lower level ones, the starting price is going to be $200 million. And there are not a lot of schools other than like a Memphis, which has a lot of money with boosters from FedEx, etc. They're going to be able to offer that much money. So a lot of Group of Five schools are sitting there going, we're in a very bad spot, not just within our own conferences, but the idea of trying to jump up almost seems impossible these days.
Yeah, scary hours, and it feels kind of sad just to see some of those schools maybe get left by the wayside as we approach the future.